to be back with our webinar series, and it's our 9th topic. And as you know, our topic for discussion today is eosinophilia, how to proceed. And I feel that it's a gray area, especially for the postgraduate, and I hope it will be a very useful session for you. And I think we are very lucky to have such an eminent speaker on this topic, our beloved Dr. P.K. Shashidharan sir. He's the former HOD in General Medicine, Government Medical College, Kozhikode, and presently working as a senior consultant in PVS Hospital and Aster MIMS, Kozhikode. And he's also working in our department as an emeritus professor. And we are extremely thankful to you, sir, for being with us. And I would like to welcome Dr. P.K. Shashidharan, sir, on behalf of Department of Family Medicine and myself. And I would like to welcome all the delegates attending the webinar today. And thank you all for your participation in spite of the busy schedule. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to all of you. Let me share my screen now. Can you see? Can you see now?
Yes, sir.
Can see now? Hello, can you see?
Yes, sir.
Okay. A happy New Year 2022 to all of you. This is a topic we have selected because it is a very gray area. It's a heterogeneous group of disorders. The only common thing is blood eosinophilia. I will give two case scenarios before I go to the subject proper. One was a 16-year-old boy with breathlessness on exertion of unexplained reason. Physical examination was normal. He was investigated extensively for cardiac and respiratory causes. ECG, X-ray, echo was normal, no diagnosis. But incidentally, an eosinophil count of 8% was noted. How do we proceed from there? I will discuss that in the middle. And the other case scenario is a 45-year-old male who had a right upper quadrant pain. Actually, it was somewhere in the lumbar region. On palpation, it was in the upper quadrant for 4 years. And on evaluation, he was found to have a USG abnormality of gallbladder polyp, and he was advised cholecystectomy. Please mute all. And on evaluation, there was bronchial asthma and atopic allergic tendency. And the differential count, as you can see here, showed an eosinophil count of 39%. So how do we approach that patient? These two patients, I will come back after some discussion on eosinophilia. Eosinophil was first described by Ehrlich in 1879 for the blood cells with intracytoplasmic granules with affinity for the acidic dye eosin, and they are stained red. And on electron microscopy, they have distinct crystalloid granules. The granules contain highly cationic basic proteins, which are implicated in the tissue infiltration, which is observed in asthma and similar allergic conditions and other eosinophilic disorders. The normal count, the percentage-wise, it is usually up to 7% on differential count. And we can calculate the absolute eosinophil count from this percentage, eosinophil percentage into total leukocyte count into divided by 100. That will give the absolute eosinophil count for all practical purposes. Otherwise, you can ask for absolute eosinophil count ourselves from the laboratory. More than 600 is approximately 7% absolute eosinophil count. And mild is 600 to 1,500, moderate is 5,500 to 5,000, very high, more than 5,000. That is absolute eosinophil count. Eosinophils are active when the body is, in fact, fighting against bigger organisms, which the usual lymphocytes and neutrophils are unable to deal with. And they often come into picture to counter the parasitic infections or in dealing with tumors and some toxins. And they are known to slow the progression of solid tumors. Probably it appears from this behavior that they have a bigger or greater role than neutrophils and lymphocytes. Or in fact, they are capable of dealing with unwanted agents, which other cellular elements cannot deal with. So in effect, even now, we actually do not know the complete role of eosinophil in health and disease. It is largely unclear. It is seen to adopt different roles in different situations. Sometimes it is protective, and sometimes they are damaging to the individual. And tissue damage invariably happens when eosinophils are inappropriately activated. And this happens by production, and the production and function of eosinophils are influenced by IL-5, interleukin-5. Eosinophilia is seen in extrinsic asthma. This is mediated by T helper 2 cells. They mediate this response. But in intrinsic asthma, also there is eosinophilic infiltration in the tissues. Though there is no blood eosinophilia, there is no Th2 response in intrinsic asthma. In extrinsic asthma, the atopic allergic asthma, there is obvious T helper 2 cell mediated response, and there is tissue and blood eosinophilia as well. Eosinophil specific granules are toxic to several cells besides the larvae of helminths. Of the human body itself, it can sometimes create damage. And chronically elevated eosinophil count from any cause could lead to permanent tissue damage. And this is what happens sometimes in endomyocardial fibrosis and some eosinophil mediated vasculitis, because the eosinophil granules are toxic to the endothelium. They release pro-inflammatory mediators like leukotrienes, platelet activating factor, which can damage the cells, and TGF alpha and TGF beta, which can lead to fibrosis as well. That's why the EMF-like manifestations. In asthma and pulmonary eosinophilia, the damage is partly reversible. But remember that eosinophil numbers in blood do not always indicate the extent of eosinophil infiltration tissues. Tissue eosinophil only, but no blood eosinophil can be a situation in some organ-specific eosinophilic diseases, like eosinophilic colitis, eosinophilic esophagitis, eosinophilic appendicitis. There may not be any blood eosinophilia. And in those situations, the patient evaluation may ultimately require a biopsy from the tissue involved to say that it was eosinophilic. But you can indirectly come to that possibility by eliminating other common causes. So how do we proceed to evaluate an eosinophilia? Patient with eosinophilia and an undiagnosed clinical problem. We must be aware of all the conditions where eosinophilia occurs and their clinical features. That alone helps to shortlist the possibilities. And coming to types of eosinophilia, the commonest is secondary or reactive eosinophilia. And second commonest, you can say, you don't find a cause, but it is again secondary, but you don't find a cause. So you call it as idiopathic. When you are actually idiopathic word is derived from the word idiot. We are idiot regarding the cause. That's only what it means. We have not found out a cause in spite of evaluation. That no obvious cause detected. That is idiopathic. That is a second group. Then you have a primary, or where it is a clonal disorder, neoplastic disorder. Typical hypereosinophilic syndromes are described here. But hypereosinophilic syndrome-like presentation can occur whenever the absolute eosinophil count is very high. But it occurs due to a primary or a clonal disorder or a neoplastic disorder. Then only it is called a primary hypereosinophilic syndrome. These are the secondary causes of eosinophilia. Allergic and atopic is the commonest, especially in industrialized countries. But parasitic infections are the commonest in developing countries, third world countries, and even in India now. Third, anyway, it is drugs, several drugs. But always remember, hypoaldolism can have unexplained eosinophilia, because steroid has got an eosinopenic action. Steroid deficiency will lead to increased eosinophil count. And vasculitic disorders several of them, especially the allergic conjunctivitis and glandomatosis, and sometimes polyarteritis nodosa can have peripheral eosinophilia. Neoplasms like lymphomas, especially Hodgkin's disease, can have it. I had seen a patient with Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia coming with a severe eosinophilia and extensive skin lesions. But remember that it is very rare to get eosinophilia in infections other than parasitic infections. These are the commonest then. Commonest is parasitic, second commonest atopic allergic, drugs and toxins come the third group. And mild eosinophilia only in atopic allergic disorders. So if they have moderate to high count in atopic allergic disorders, always think of coexisting parasitic infection. People with a typical allergic atopic tendency may come with a higher eosinophil count and more severe response like bronchial asthma, refractory asthma. Always think of coexisting parasitic infection or a complicating vasculitic disorder like Churg-Strauss syndrome or allergic angiitis and granulomatosis. Or if they have bronchiectasis-like presentation, think of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. See, these are the clinical scenarios we come across with the eosinophilia. Obvious atopic individuals with mild eosinophilia. You will have the diagnosis even before the eosinophilia is noted. But incidentally, the noting the eosinophilia supports our clinical diagnosis. But another situation is high eosinophils giving a clue to the undiagnosed clinical problem. You have a patient with an undiagnosed clinical problem, and then you get a higher than normal eosinophil count. That might suggest that an unexplained cough could be a cough variant asthma, or an iron deficiency anemia could be due to a hookworm infestation, or you have a respiratory symptom that with eosinophilia, it supports a diagnosis of tropical pulmonary eosinophilia, or a patient with tiredness, fatigue, hyperpigmentation, the eosinophilia gives a clue to hypoadrenalism, or a patient with vasculitis and atopic tendency supports a diagnosis of allergic angiitis and granulomatosis. While on some treatment, maybe even anti-tuberculosis treatment or immunosuppressants, if there is eosinophilia, suspect drug-induced eosinophilia. If you find pulmonary infiltrate with eosinophilia or pulmonary eosinophilia, which is used by a short form SPI syndrome, think of several disorders like tropical pulmonary eosinophilia, allergic angiitis and granulomatosis, or even allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, and some other conditions like Laufley syndrome. The typical hypereosinophilic syndrome is very high absolute eosinophilic count with a multi-system involvement, maybe cardiac, respiratory, neurological, skin involvement. Then only you think of a hypereosinophilic syndrome, only when the absolute eosinophil count is very high and the patient has multi-system involvement. Asthma and eosinophilia is a common problem. It's an inflammatory disorder involving eosinophils. Blood eosinophilia is seen only in atopic allergic asthma, that as I mentioned before, that is extrinsic asthma. Intrinsic, you don't find any blood eosinophilia, but there is tissue eosinophilia. Eosinophil numbers are increased in airways in both allergic and non-allergic asthma, that is both intrinsic and extrinsic asthma. And there is actually the inflammation is mediated by eosinophils in both. Spurt of eosinophilia is seen in both. Eosinophilia helps in differentiating some patients who come with unexplained obstructive airway disease to say that it is an atypical presentation of bronchial asthma. Some patients with bronchial asthma can have a COPD-like presentation. Mild eosinophilia only find in asthma, except as I mentioned before, when they develop problems like allergic angiitis, granulomatosis, or tropical eosinophilia, or allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. Usually get less than 10% only in mild asthma. Coming back to the case scenario, which I mentioned, that 16-year-old boy with breathlessness on exhalation, he was investigated extensively and no diagnosis, but incidentally, an eosinophil count of 8% was got. So how do you go about? Actually, when a proper history is elicited, you can get subtle atopic tendency. That was enough. Once you get atopic tendency and 8% eosinophil, and there is no other clue to any other diagnosis, you can easily postulate it as subclinical bronchospasm. This is an atypical presentation of bronchial asthma. Bronchial asthma can have various atypical presentations. That one of them is unexplained breathlessness on exhalation. how do you arrive at a diagnosis? Noting at the eosinophilia and atopic tendency. And simply by giving antihistamines and if needed bronchodilatase, patient became, in fact, this patient got relief just with antihistamines. And diagnosis, this again reinforces a statement that diagnosis do not come by lab test, but by clinical evaluation. Pulmonary infiltrate with eosinophilia can occur typically in these conditions. Most importantly, Loeffler syndrome, tropical pulmonary eosinophilia, Church-Strauss syndrome, that is allergic angiitis and granulomatosis, allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, drug reactions and toxins, hypersensitivity vasculitis, and hypereosinophilic syndromes. All these can have pulmonary infiltrate with eosinophilia. The Loeffler syndrome is originally described in ascariasis, but it's seldom used now. You find marked eosinophilia with pulmonary infiltrate, and the infiltrate can be nodular. Sometimes you get subsegmented consolidation, and you may think it is bacterial infection. It could be parasitic infestation or drug reaction, or even when you get pulmonary infiltrate, do not diagnose it as Loeffler syndrome. That term itself is inappropriate. It could be any of these. It could be parasitic, it could be drug reaction, it could be even allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. So this term will not give a diagnosis, it is only a clinical situation. Allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis you suspect in patients with refractory asthma and features of bronchiectasis. That means like hemoptysis. Even today we had a patient like that, or when a patient has typical bronchiectasis like picture in with copious expectoration or X-ray showing cystic dilatation of the bronchus. So if you have features of bronchiectasis and refractory asthma, always think of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. Tropical pulmonary eosinophilia actually is an eosinophilic pneumonia. Results from distinct immune response to the blood-borne microfilaria. Both Wuchereria, Bancrofti, and Brugia malaria are implicated in it. Pulmonary symptoms and infiltrates in filaria endemic region should make you think of this diagnosis, like in India. And markedly elevated IgE may be there, but you don't need IgE and anti-filarial antibody to diagnose. It is clinical diagnosis in a appropriate epidemiological setting as we see in our country. Any parasitic infection may cause it. Don't think it is only for, it is reserved for microfilaria. Any parasitic infestation or infection can produce this picture. And that is why it is called as non-filarial tropical pulmonary eosinophilia of uncertain etiology. It can be used as a term when you do not get anything to suggest filariasis. You have pulmonary symptoms and infiltrates, just like the typical microfilaria induced tropical pulmonary eosinophilia. And the peripheral eosinophilia can be mild to very high sometimes. Very rarely, when the eosinophilia is very high, you may even get hepatosplenomegaly and lymphadenopathy. I will give a case history which I had seen long back in 1988, a 25-year-old male who came with the cough and breathlessness, atopy and asthma. He had generalized lymphadenopathy and hepatosplenomegaly. We thought of all possibilities like lymphoma, but chest X-ray showed infiltrates. That chest finding and atopic tendency together made us think of a tropical pulmonary eosinophilia. But the total count in eosinophil count was surprising. Total count was 45,000 with 60% eosinophils. And he was given DEC and steroid only with antihistamines, and he made a complete recovery. And even now, he has atopy and asthma, and he's on inhaled steroid. He doesn't have any eosinophilia now. And he came recently for review a few months back. At that time, I found that he is now suffering from non-alcoholic steatohepatitis because he has put on weight. So anyway, this is a rare presentation of tropical pulmonary eosinophilia presenting like a hypereosinophilic syndrome like disease. If this patient is not treated promptly, he can go on to develop all the features of hypereosinophilia, which is described in the primary hypereosinophilic syndromes. He can have eosinophilic vasculitis, Loeffler's pneumonia, endocarditis, myocarditis, or even hemiplegia due to vascular involvement affecting brain, or skin lesions like vasculitis. So prompt recognition and treatment is the approach in any patient with hypereosinophilia, rather than calling it as hypereosinophilic syndrome and looking for the markers. Coming to Churg-Strauss syndrome or the allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis, it is a systemic vasculitis, eosinophilia, and refractory asthma. So anyone with an asthmatic tendency, atopic tendency, if you find vasculitis, make this diagnosis, especially if they have hypertension and other features. Marked eosinophilia in a poorly controlled asthma is an indicator of this condition. Associated with the eosinophilia and pulmonary infiltrates can occur. Granuloma at any other site can be the only presentation. Some people come with the granuloma in the breast with the eosinophilia, granuloma in other areas. Recently, we had a patient with extensive lymphadenopathy in multiple sites with eosinophilia. So the presentation can be with the granuloma alone, granuloma with vasculitis, or pulmonary infiltrates, granuloma, eosinophilia, vasculitis, all together with the refractory hypertension due to the vasculitis. You can get a variety of combination of findings in this condition. Rarely, the parasitic infestation of the lungs can coexist with this condition, and you may think it is tropical pulmonary eosinophilia only. But the other features might make you think of the vasculitic features, and granuloma, demonstration of granuloma either by clinical features or by biopsy should make you think of the coexistence. And with appropriate treatment, it has a very good prognosis. Coming back to the second case scenario, which I mentioned, the 45-year-old male who came with right upper quarter pain of 4 years duration with a bronchial asthma, atopic allergic tendency. He had hypertension, dyslipidemia. He was on amlodipine, statin, and alcohol. And you may think the eosinophil count was 39%. Healed vasculitic lesions were noted on the lower limbs, and chest showed rhonchi and tenderness in the right upper quadrant. This was the count. You can see the 39% eosinophils. USG showed a gallbladder calculus bar or possible gallbladder polyp, and he was advised cholecystectomy. So what was done was further investigation showed SGOT more than SGPT and alkaline phosphatase increased. So in a situation like this, you need to suspect granulomatous hepatitis. And so we thought of allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis and investigated on those lines. ANA was positive, and you may not get always see P-ANGA positivity in such patients. Anyway, ANA was positive, and it supported an autoimmune etiology, and he was given levocetirizine, albendazole, steroid, and later on azathioprine to control the granulomatous hepatitis too. And finally, he recovered completely. The cholecystectomy was avoided in him. That's important for making a correct diagnosis in such patients. And always suspect allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis and allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis in anyone with refractory asthma. If there is bronchiectasis, think of allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis. If there is no bronchiectasis, only pulmonary infiltrates, refractory asthma, hypertension, and vasculitis, think of Churg-Strauss syndrome. Sometimes they come with pulmonary infiltrate alone, or vasculitis with the granuloma or granuloma alone, as I mentioned before. Coming to another interesting case history, a 15-year-old female whom I had seen long back, who had polyarthralgia, myalgia, puffiness of face, and bilateral ptosis for 3 weeks, history of sneezing, cough, and wheeze of 5 years with atopic tendency. The patient had hemoptysis 6 months back, diagnosed with bronchiectasis, and was getting cetirizine, theophylline, and steroid inhalers. But off late, when she came, the eosinophil count was 50%, platelet count and hemoglobin normal. There was no retinal vasculitis, intraocular pressure was normal, visual acuity was also normal. CT orbit showed prominence of extraocular muscle with the lacrimal glands enlarged. So diagnosis made elsewhere was Wegener's granulomatosis, and was being managed steroids, was doing well with steroid. There was no lymphadenopathy or hepatosplenomegaly on examination. So the clinical diagnosis on review with us was allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis, because patient had allergic atopic tendency. One should never make a Wegener's granulomatosis diagnosis in such patients. Anyway, all investigations did not contribute much, and she was started on steroids, cetirizine, and DEC. But she improved, eosinophilia decreased, proptosis disappeared. But after a year, she comes back with puffiness of left eye alone, with slight proptosis on that side, and there was a conjunctival swelling. This time also eosinophil count was 48%, total count was high. This was a patient, you can see the puffiness in the left eye. There was mild proptosis here, but it's not obvious because of the puffiness. And on everting the eyelid, there was lacrimal gland enlargement. This was a lacrimal gland enlargement, which on biopsy showed granuloma. That is enough to diagnose Churg-Strauss syndrome, allergic angiitis, and granulomatosis. So being sure of the diagnosis, this time she was treated with steroid and cyclophosphamide, and she made a complete recovery and did not have any recurrence after that. Coming to the other setting, infections and eosinophilia, mostly it is parasitic, where you get moderate to high eosinophilia. But it is extremely rare to get eosinophilia in bacterial or mycobacterial, fungal or viral or rickettsial infections. So do not suspect any of them as a primary disorder when you get eosinophilia. Tuberculosis, if you are sure of tuberculosis and if there is eosinophilia, think of hypotelism, or it may be drug-induced. Occasionally, you may get in herpes and HIV, but even in HIV, it may be due to hypotelism or the drug-induced. Cryptococcus occasionally can produce CSF eosinophilia, not blood eosinophilia. So if you get eosinophilia and you're suspecting infection, think of parasitic infections only. The principal ones are Ascariasis, Filariasis, hookworm. Rarely you may find Strongyloides and Toxocaris. That is not seen here. It depends on the geographic location and epidemiological setting. You may get high counts in children when larvae migrate from intestine to lungs to produce the typical Laufley syndrome. Originally described Laufley syndrome is due to the migration of Ascaris larvae, rhabditiform. I think it is rhabditiform now. Filariasis can produce marked eosinophilia with the tropical pulmonary eosinophilia. These are the two parasitic infestations which can come with the pulmonary infiltrate and the eosinophilia. So true eosinophilia in parasitic infestations, you need not always get blood eosinophilia. You may get only tissue eosinophilia around the parasite. Blood eosinophilia may be absent. For example, in hydatid cyst, you may not get any eosinophilia at all. It could be antigenically sequestrated, and there could be intermittent leakage of fluid, which transiently stimulate increase in blood eosinophilia with urticaria, bronchospasm, or anaphylaxis. At that stage, you may find eosinophilia. Otherwise, hydatid disease can present without eosinophilia. This was an interesting patient, a 10th standard student, male student. He had aggressive behavior, poor scholastic performance, and backwardness in studies, and no atopic tendency, but hemoglobin was 12, MCV was low, RDW was high. You can see the flat nails, he had nail biting also. The eosinophil count was 8%. So it clearly tells that it was a iron deficiency which caused all these symptoms, but the cause of iron deficiency was hookworm infestations. When you get iron deficiency and eosinophilia, think of hookworm infestation. This is an interesting, very interesting patient who had a redness in eye, raised intraocular pressure, and total hyphema. The eosinophil count was 7%, just 7% only. But on evaluation, it was surprising to see that there was a hookworm in the anterior chamber of the eye. It was never, I don't know whether it is reported before. I think it was published. It was long back when I was in the medical college. It only suggests that parasitic infestations could be the cause of unexplained swellings or bleedings in lungs, brain, or other organs. Think of this possibility in unexplained bleeding or swellings in unexplained situations. So I will give another patient. This was a patient who had a swelling around the upper eyelid, which turned out to be the dirofilaria. You can see the vein that is being removed from that swelling. So these kind of parasites may be there anywhere. It may not be such bigger ones. The smaller ones may be residing anywhere in the body to produce atypical symptoms, uncommon symptoms, and one should always consider parasitic infestations in uncommon diseases with uncommon manifestations, because these are being a common disorder. This is a very long one. This is extremely common now in India. The ophthalmology department keeps getting at least one every day. And this kind, I showed it only to tell that only because it is seen here, we pick up that it might go to other areas and produce unexplained symptoms. So we should be careful of unexplained manifestations in other organs. So the enterobial-based vermicularis, a pinworm, occasionally causes eosinophilia when it inverts tissues. Otherwise, it will not produce. Trichinosis caused by ingestion of ancestral cyst of larvae of Trichinella spiralis. You may get prominent eosinophilia when the in early stages when the larva migrates into striated muscles via blood. But after that, sometimes in parasitic disorders, sometimes eosinophilia need not occur even in fatal cases. So absence of eosinophilia does not rule out parasitic diseases. That's a very important point to keep in mind. The tissue eosinophilia may be there, blood eosinophilia may not be there in some parasitic disorders. Always suspect parasitic infestation in unusual disorders. Strong eloidus suspect subclinical infection persists for more than 20 years. Stool examination often can be negative, and by chance steroid is given with a wrong diagnosis of hypereosinophilic syndrome because the eosinophilia, you can get a disseminated disease. So do not try steroid suspecting hypereosinophilia unless you have ruled out parasitic infestations. This is a very important point. Do not give steroid even if the eosinophil count is very high unless you have ruled out parasitic infestations. Visceral larva migrans can occur due to Ascaris or other Toxocaris, Catis, and Canis and Catis, but you don't see it here. But you can get it with Ascaris. The larvae can migrate. It can produce symptoms at any site, including lungs, brain, anywhere, and cause any unexplained symptoms. Medications and toxins can be sometimes a cause for eosinophilia. It can be mild to high. And when the eosinophil count is very high, even if it is medication induced, it can produce hypereosinophilic syndrome. It can return to normal on stopping the drugs. Pulmonary eosinophilia after ingestion or inhalation of medications and toxins can occur sometimes. Asymptomatic pulmonary infiltrates with eosinophilia can sometimes be due to medication-induced eosinophilia. Or they may come with chronic cough with or without dyspnea. Fever, acute eosinophilic pneumonia can also occur when the eosinophil counts are very high. So consider drug-induced, and do not forget drug-induced eosinophilia. Even the indigenous medicines can be responsible. The temporal relationship to the potential offending agent is a clue to the diagnosis of medication-induced eosinophilia. We had seen some patients with pulmonary infiltrates and eosinophilia due to some Ayurvedic medicines including. These are some of the drugs: iodides, amiodarone, aspirin, antimicrobials, anticonvulsants, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, hydrochlorothiazide, radiographic contrast media, immunosuppressants like methotrexate, cyclophosphamide, azathioprine, even indigenous medicines, as I mentioned now. Very rare described syndromes are eosinophilia myalgia syndrome due to tryptophan. And from Spain, this was a case report, toxic oil syndrome. So toxins in some medicines or food items can be a cause for unexplained eosinophilia. So look for unexplained exposure to the fast food, junk foods and all some people are very often taking. So if you get unexplained eosinophilia, this is another area which we need to explore. So it's basically a good history and studying the epidemiological setting and the temporal relation between onset of symptoms and the onset of eosinophilia, which gives a clue to the diagnosis. What to do in drug-induced eosinophilia alone? No need to stop, you can continue. But if the eosinophilia is high and there is involvement of lungs, kidney and heart and organ dysfunction, you need to stop the drug. Adrenal insufficiency is another condition where unexplained eosinophilia occurs because glucocorticoids excite eosinopenia. So in the absence of it, you get eosinophilia. Persons of even mild eosinophilia in critically ill patients consider adrenal insufficiency. This is a very important clinical clue. I can give a patient history. This was a patient whom I seen long back. A 55-year-old male had an unexplained GI symptoms. He had undergone all investigations possible on earth, including CT, MRI, upper and lower GI endoscopies. They suspected in that hospital hypotelism as well because of some of the features that like hyperpigmentation. But when the serum cortisol came normal, they ignored that possibility. But they missed two important clinical clues. The typical hyperpigmentation was not given much importance, which the patient actually volunteered to tell. And there was eosinophilia, which they treated with the DEC and albendazole. So once you are aware of this presentation, that hypereosinophilia or eosinophilia can occur in hypotelism, when you have typical features, even if the serum cortisol is normal, one should not ignore that possibility, because serum cortisol can be normal in some patients with the hypotension. This was another patient, supportive evidence when serum cortisol was normal. This hyperpigmentation was the clue to diagnosis. Coming to the hypereosinophilic syndrome, we suspect that in any patient with a very high eosinophilia, that is, when the absolute eosinophil count is more than 1,500 for more than 6 months. If it is continuously present for more than 6 months, then you call it as a hypereosinophilic syndrome. In addition, another condition recorded is signs and symptoms of organ damage. One is absolute eosinophilia, more than 1,500, that is very high eosinophil count, and more than 6 months. Second is signs and symptoms of organ damage. That is heart, skin, or nervous system may be involved, and then it qualifies to be called as a hypereosinophilic syndrome. Again, you have two types, secondary and primary or idiopathic. The idiopathic hypereosinophilic syndromes are uncommon but potentially fatal of a heterogeneous group with hypereosinophilia, organ damage by eosinophilic infiltration, mediator release. Often it is a clinical diagnosis. This is what I said, but you need to exclude other causes of eosinophilia like parasitic infection, just like the patient whom I have mentioned last in the beginning about a tropical eosinophilia with lymphadenopathy, hepatosplenomegaly. It could be just a parasitic infestation. Just because the eosinophil counts are very high, do not call it idiopathic or primary hypereosinophilia. It can still be due to the secondary causes. Look for drugs, reactive causes like neoplasms including. In the typical hypereosinophilic syndrome, there is a clonal expansion of myeloid cells with the eosinophilic lineage, which is called as a chronic eosinophilic leukemia. This is a typical primary hypereosinophilic syndrome. And if you can diagnose it, it can be easily treated with imatinib. That's one interesting aspect of this particular disorder. Or it can be sometimes due to clonal expansion of T lymphocytes with the overproduction of interleukin-5, because interleukin-5 activates eosinophils, and there is reactive eosinophilia secondary to that. Very rarely, polyclonal T cell reaction with IL-5 mediated reactive eosinophilia. These are the three situations where you get a hypereosinophilic syndrome, of which this is the commonest, the chronic eosinophilic leukemia-like situation. Manifestations, whether it is primary or secondary, when you have very high eosinophilic count lasting for months together, you will have all these manifestations. The cardiac can be myocarditis, endocarditis, and the patient may be presenting with the EMF like endomyocardial fibrosis, mitral regurgitation, tricuspid regurgitation, or even mitral stenosis. Or nervous system can have thromboembolism, encephalopathy, or peripheral neuropathy. Skin can have angioedema, urticaria, erythematous, pruritic papules and nodules, and eosinophilic vasculitis. You may just think of vasculitic disorder only. Pulmonary can be non-productive cough, eosinophilic infiltrate in the lung, or pulmonary edema due to the left ventricular EMF-like presentation. Sometimes the left ventricular EMF can produce pulmonary edema, or it could be due to pulmonary thromboembolism. Mitral stenosis-like presentation can also occur. Spleen, liver, eye, and GI are less commonly involved, but I had shown one patient who had a secondary hypereosinophilic syndrome with hepatosplenomegaly and lymphadenopathy. So you can get any organ involvement in hypereosinophilic syndrome. This was a patient whom I had seen long back and somewhere in 2000, before 2000. Those days we did not have imatinib. So the patient had a very unfortunate outcome. 25-year-old, he presented with a patellasone excision, dry cough, and chest infiltrates. Clinically, we diagnosed RHD MS. There was no lymphadenopathy or hepatosplenomegaly. Total count of 45,000. Eosinophil count was 50%. This qualifies to be called as a hypereosinophilic syndrome. No secondary causes could be found out. Responded partially to steroid, recurred and stopping steroid. This is an important clue to the hypereosinophilic syndrome. On treatment with the DEC or albendazole and steroid, if the eosinophilia recurs, always suspect the primary hypereosinophilic syndrome. And then he was given hydroxyurea, but later on when he improved, he stopped on his own, and then he came back with infective endocarditis and hemiplegia. And this time he was in severe CCF and RV EMF, right ventricular EMF type of presentation. Then we started him again on hydroxyurea and steroid. We could not get PDGFR alpha at that time. Those days it was not available. And imatinib was beyond our imagination because it was costing 1 lakh rupees per month for a treatment. It was not possible. So we did not give it. But later on, after the recently, actually, when the patient was on treatment, imatinib suddenly became cheaper. The cost came down. Then we started him on imatinib without doing PDGFR alpha, and then he had an excellent response. But by the time he already had hemiplegia, that is why I said it is an unfortunate story of a patient with hypereosinophilic syndrome. And this is the patient. This patient had chronic eosinophilic leukemia, mature eosinophils. It's a rare chronic myeloproliferative disorder. It's a clonal disorder. You can demonstrate PDGFR alpha if in some patients. If you can demonstrate, they will respond excellently to imatinib. Recently, I had a patient who was referred by a diabetologist. Patient had chronic pancreatitis and type 1 diabetes. Recently, started noticing vasculitic lesions, and the total count was 45,000. The eosinophil count was 40%. And then he was referred to me, and on evaluation, I found that he had a PDGFR alpha positive mutation, and on imatinib, he completely recovered from the eosinophilic leukemia. That is, but he needs maintenance treatment with the imatinib, like the CML. It's like CML only. It's the mutation is different. Acute eosinophilic leukemia is extremely rare, and it can occur sometimes. Some of these chronic eosinophilic leukemia can progress to acute eosinophilic leukemia, but the eosinophils are immature in this situation. It's not mature eosinophil. Rarely, acute leukemias can have eosinophilia, like B-cell ALL with this particular mutation can have eosinophilia. These are still rarer disorders. Do not think of them when a patient comes with. But if you have acute leukemia with the eosinophilia, it has a good prognosis group. B-cell ALL with a translocation 514. This is one variant of acute lymphatic leukemia. So there are some miscellaneous disorders also with eosinophilia. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, it's a heterogeneous group of disorders. You have several disorders with eosinophilia. There are some miscellaneous disorders. Atherosclerotic disease, the cholesterol embolization can lead to mild increase because larger molecules which cannot be handled by the lymphocytes and neutrophils, there the eosinophil come to handle them. That's why in atherosclerotic disease, you may get thrombocytopenia, eosinophiliuria, renal insufficiency, livedo reticularis, and purpuritosis, a vasculitic mimicker. Blood eosinophilia may be a clinical clue to this disorder. Neoplasms and eosinophilia. Some patients with solid tumors can come with the eosinophilia as a manifestation. One of the patients referred from a dermatologist was extensive skin lesions with exfoliation and eosinophil count of 40%. And on evaluation, it was an 85-year-old man. And on evaluation, we could find it was a Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia. And on treatment with the cyclophosphamide and steroid, he had a complete recovery and is on maintenance treatment. Chronic eosinophilic leukemia situation I already mentioned. It is one of the hypereosinophilic syndromes. Or acute eosinophilic leukemia can occur sometimes as a progression of chronic to acute or associated with acute leukemias. CML can sometimes have very high eosinophil counts because CML is a pluripotent stem cell disorder, and you can get differentiation to any of the variant. So you can get neutrophils or eosinophils also can increase sometimes. Hodgkin's can have sometimes moderate eosinophilia because of IL-5. Langerhans cell histiocytosis can have sometimes eosinophilia, but intense tissue eosinophilia only is seen in some of them. Tumor-associated eosinophilia can occur in response to any of these tumors because it can occur with CA cervix, lung carcinomas, squamous cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma stomach, large bowel, and uterine body carcinomas, or transition cell carcinoma of the bladder. So you can get, when the body is trying to deal with the larger antigens, which cannot be dealt with by the usual immune defense mechanisms, you may get eosinophilia. That is a reactive eosinophilia. HIV can have eosinophilia usually due to adrenal insufficiency of CMV origin or due to other problems like drug reactions. Systemic mastocytosis is a rare condition where you get eosinophilia. Then there is another entity where you do not find any blood eosinophilia, but organ-specific eosinophilia. Organ abnormalities, you can get any of them. You can get only in the skin, like a recurrent cutaneous necrotizing eosinophilic vasculitis, eosinophilic fasciitis, eosinophilic cellulitis, but blood eosinophilia may not be there. You need a biopsy sometimes to demonstrate it. Atopic dermatitis and bullous pemphigoid with mild to moderate eosinophilia. Eosinophilic paniculitis, seen in some obese people. Episodes of angioedema and eosinophilia. Eosinophilic ulcers of the oral mucosa can occur sometimes. You can get any organ involvement, esophagus, intestine, appendix. One patient with an unexplained recurrent appendicitis was actually due to eosinophilic appendicitis. And after giving albendazole and steroid, he made a complete recovery. Because I suspected it because of the atopic tendency that he had. But sometimes eosinophil count may not be high in the blood. Urinary bladder, gallbladder, kidneys, meninges, pleura, joints, any organ can have eosinophilic inflammation. So you may need a biopsy from the concerned site to demonstrate it, or CSF showing eosinophilia may be the clue in some. Coming back to another patient, a very interesting patient whom I had seen recently, a 29-year-old female, third gravida, following abortion and DNC. She had cough and fever, and the total count was found very high. Recurrent abortions and made me suspect a collagen vascular disorder. And on investigation, this was a total count, 49,000, hemoglobin 8, ESR 110, iron deficiency, and 80% eosinophils. So we thought it is just an iron deficiency and tropical eosinophilia, but alkaline phosphatase was high. The SCPT was high, and albumin global reversal also was there. This suggested possible another disorder along with collagen vascular disorder. So we thought of simple allergic angiitis and granulomatosis with liver involvement, but on evaluation we found that this patient had SLE as well. ANS was 3, anti-dsDNA was high, APLA IgG was positive. So this patient had a SLE with allergic angiitis and granulomatosis. So such combinations can occur sometimes. This patient had atopic tendency as well. So this patient was started on prednisolone and azathioprine. Such high eosinophil counts are not commonly associated with SLE. Coexisting tropical pulmonary eosinophilia was also considered, treated with albendazole and DSE as well before giving steroid and azathioprine. Presently, her total counts are normalized and she's asymptomatic on further follow-up. So diagnosis in this patient was SLE with the antiphospholipid antibody syndrome and possible pulmonary embolism. And the eosinophilia was a tropical pulmonary eosinophilia type, probably allergic angiitis and granulomatosis. This is another patient who came to me long back with a sudden onset blindness due to retinal artery occlusion and very high blood pressure. And the eosinophilia was a clue to suspect high polyarteritis nodosa. She developed gangrene of the fingers. You can see the multiple vasculitic lesion, necrotizing lesions in the breast, and lividoreticularis type lesions. So such eosinophilia may occur with necrotizing vasculitis also. It was a polyarteritis nodosa with the retinal artery occlusion and eosinophilia. It was hepatitis B positive. So coming to the take-home messages, we need to have a high index of suspicion, look for supportive evidence, look for allergic symptoms and atopic tendency. Very meticulous history will help. But cough and wheeze may be there, and ask for current and recent medications, including indigenous medicines. Look for constitutional symptoms, history of travel, including international travel, to suspect unusual infections, and the epidemiological data. These can give a clue to the diagnosis. And then physical examination, look for abnormalities like organomegaly to suspect neoplasm. Supportive evidences you can look for in the hemogram, SGOTPT, alkaline phosphatase, albumin global reversal, and elevated alkaline phosphatase. All these can suggest other organ involvement. Chest X-ray can demonstrate the pulmonary infiltrates. And there are several disorders can present with eosinophilia. And some never have a cause despite evaluation. And then in such patients, we need to plan an empirical therapy based on the commonest cause and the epidemiological setting. So you may have a clinical diagnosis, but no other differential diagnosis. In that setting, supportive evidences in history and physical examination can help us. And you need to treat the cause of hypereosinophilic syndrome, like with empirical therapy with the DEC, albendazole, or ivermectin, then steroid when needed. But steroid should be given only after giving antihelminthics. If you should be sure of using steroid, or you should be very carefully using it. Unless you are sure of it, it can create problems. And in true hypereosinophilic syndrome, after stopping steroid, it will promptly relapse. At this stage, you need to look for the clonal markers like PDGFR alpha. And if it is positive, imatinib will give an excellent response. But anyway, if you're suspecting the primary clonal disorder, then hydroxyurea, interferon also can be used in treatment of them. So it is a very complex disorder, vague disorder. The only common thing is eosinophilia. We need to have a thorough clinical approach, individualize the patient rather than having a protocol-based management in eosinophilia. I hope I have cleared some of the doubts. We can have some questions and some discussion if you need. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Okay, if you have any queries, please unmute and ask.
Any questions? Or you can put it in the chat box also if you do. Hello.
Sir, I'm Dr. Rajesh from Thrissur.
Sir,
I want to have a question. So in unexplained cases of eosinophilia, after meticulous clinical history and examination, if you don't find any cause, we often empirically resort to, as told, DEC and albendazole. So how long should we give empiric albendazole, at what dose and how long?
Okay. First, if you think microfilariae is possible, give DEC first. But you may sometimes have to give both. DEC for 3 weeks, albendazole for 2 weeks at least, 400 milligram twice daily in adults for 2 weeks. But you have to be careful when you prescribe albendazole 400 milligram twice daily for 2 weeks. The medical shop person will not give it. So you have to carefully tell them, because they think that it is a wrong prescription. 400 milligram twice daily for 2 weeks is the usual treatment. But steroid has to be used to control the symptoms due to the eosinophilic infiltration.
Sir, again in pulmonary eosinophilia, if you have an X-ray infiltrated eosinophilia, can they have a pulmonary edema-like presentation?
They can have pulmonary edema-like presentation, especially if there is an LV EMF like infiltrative fibrosis. Endomyocardial fibrosis can occur in the left ventricle in prolonged chronic eosinophilia, and they can have pulmonary edema itself, or they may even have pulmonary embolism due to the lower limb involvement, the deep vein involvement, or they may have pulmonary infiltrates. So pulmonary edema can be multifactorial. It is one is interstitial type of pulmonary edema, or you can get true pulmonary edema and pulmonary embolism. So it may be a complicating picture sometimes. So you may even get a eosinophilic pneumonia-like presentation.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other? I hope I am given done justice to the topic. I don't know, because it's a very complex topic. Nobody wants to.
I am from Thrissur.
Please. Hello.
I am suffering from generalized fluid for last more than 1.5 years, and I have consulted a dermatologist.
The voice was breaking. Please repeat. Hello. could not hear it. Anybody heard it? Can anybody repeat that question? I did not hear it.
Sorry, they disconnected for a while.
Okay. Can you repeat that?
Sir, more than 1.5 year, I was suffering from generalized pruritus, and I consulted a dermatologist for several times, and they have done routine investigation, and it was found that eosinophil was found to be the 8%, and other investigations were normal. So after on antihistamine,
And histamine, the symptoms are better. It could be an atopic dermatitis with the eosinophilia, but eosinophilia can have such skin manifestations irrespective of the cause of eosinophilia. So in such situations, the eosinophilia could be a cause for the symptoms in the skin, but you still need to find out the cause of eosinophilia. Was it atopic or due to some of these reactive causes? It can be a drug, it can be a toxin, it can be another disorder. One of the patients, as I mentioned, had a Waldenstrom macroglobulinemia. So if you can find out the cause of eosinophilia, the treatment is excellent, gives excellent results. There's no point just treating the eosinophilia alone or the skin symptoms alone. You need to find out the cause of eosinophilia. Sometimes it may be allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis also. Anyway, if you can find out the cause, the treatment gives excellent results.
Sir, after in unexplained eosinophilia, after excluding the common causes, at what point would you think of HES? As you told, would you wait for 6 months or a tissue injury?
That is it. That is an important point. In fact, you don't have to wait for 6 months. If you give all these possibilities, you withdraw the offending agents if you think of drugs, and if you treat with the DEC and albendazole and steroid, and then the patient promptly on stopping, and you don't find any other cause. Sometimes at the end of one of the patients, it was with SLE. So you don't find any other disorder on evaluation, no neoplasm, no external agents, no infections. And finally, on giving steroid, the patient responds promptly. On stopping steroid, it comes back. At that point, and there should be organ damage to call it a hypereosinophilic syndrome, without which we are not justified to consider hypereosinophilic syndrome. That's why that waiting for 6 months is included there. Anyway, you need not wait for 6 months. In fact, in the patient whom I mentioned, the patient who was referred us with the chronic pancreatitis, after a month, we asked for maybe 2 months, maximum 2 months we waited. And then because the eosinophilia promptly came back, at that point, we did the PDGFR alpha mutation, it was positive. So you don't have to wait always for 6 months, but doing it upfront may not be costly because it is an extremely rare disorder. It's better to wait and rule out all the other causes and give treatment. And on stopping steroid, if it comes back to the same level, then only we need to suspect that disorder.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions?
So there's a question from chat box.
Okay.
So how long we give antihistaminics in subclinical bronchospasm due to hypereosinophilia?
Okay. Bronchospasm, if it is due to atopic tendency and minimal eosinophilia, the antihistamines like levocetirizine can be used for lifelong without any side effect. Because unless that person has some individual difficulty to tolerate it. Like for example, some people get extreme tiredness on levocetirizine. Otherwise, if they tolerate it, you can use antihistamines lifelong, like the gentle antihistaminics like levocetirizine can be used lifelong. Even if they have tiredness, you educate them to take the levocetirizine by 4 or 5 p.m. so that by morning, next day morning, the tiredness may be gone. But most patients do not develop tiredness on levocetirizine. So if they have extreme tiredness only, we need to stop it when they don't need it. Otherwise, you can use it as a prophylactic agent. Any more? If not, any more questions in the chat box?
No more questions.
Okay, shall we wind up?
Yes, sir. We can wind up, sir.
Okay.
So one more question, sir. Has Montelukast got any role?
I don't think it does, because treating the cause of eosinophilia is more than enough. In fact, I never use Montelukast in controlling even bronchial asthma. I don't think, though it has got a role in the inflammation, the leukotrienes, but I don't think it has to be used routinely. My personal experience is to avoid it. Why should we give one more drug? If you can achieve the same result by withholding all the offending agents, triggers, and then giving levocetirizine alone, the patient does very well.
Yes. So one more question. Can mononeuritis or neuropathies present with raised eosinophil count?
Some the polyarteritis, the allergic angiitis and granulomatosis can present like mononeuritis multiplex, and sometimes only they have eosinophil count may not be always high, but you need to think of a vasculitis of that kind. Eosinophil count, if it is high, it supports allergic angiitis and granulomatosis or polyarteritis nodosa type. But both these can occur without peripheral eosinophilia. All these conditions with peripheral eosinophilia can also come without peripheral eosinophilia and only tissue eosinophilia. That vasculitic site may be showing eosinophilic infiltrates. So that is why in those situations a biopsy may give a clue to that possibility. But anyway, you'll be using steroid. Steroid will control that damage.
Okay, sir. Next question. When you go for bone marrow examination in eosinophilia, when will you go for?
Actually, there is no role. All these conditions can be managed, diagnosed and managed without a bone marrow till you have a suspicion of an acute eosinophilic leukemia or an acute leukemia with eosinophilia. That there will be some clue to that, like hepatosplenomegaly, lymphadenopathy, falling platelet count. There should be falling platelet count also. So something to suggest a bone marrow infiltration should be there, and peripheral blood showing some immature cells. Or when you doubt the anemia is coming, falling platelet count, you suspect that bone marrow is infiltrated by something else. So that you can predict. If the platelet counts are normal, hemoglobin is not falling, eosinophilia is the only problem, don't do a bone marrow. You need not do it. Because bone marrow infiltration can be easily predicted from the platelet count. Normal platelet count or a high platelet count is against bone marrow infiltration. Or unless you have falling platelet count and anemia as well, do not suspect bone marrow infiltration.
Okay. So one more question. In refractory asthma, if there is a picture of ABPA, how to treat?
Okay, that's a very good point. In patients with allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis come with hemoptysis and uncontrolled asthma, or they have frank bronchiectasis and uncontrolled asthma with bilateral leather recapitulations, copious expectoration. That kind of picture also will be there. And those patients need steroid for a long time, indefinitely. Maintenance steroid, levocetirizine, and treatment for the acute exacerbation of bronchiectasis also may be needed. But sometimes you may need immunosuppressants as well, because some of these patients whom you diagnose as allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis may be having a vasculitic component like Churg-Strauss syndrome, In fact, such overlapping clinical pictures are very common. So there you may have to use cyclophosphamide and steroid, or if you have ANA profile or C-ANCA positivity, other drugs also. Immunosuppressants other than steroid also may be used to maintain that condition. Otherwise, steroid alone can be used with antihistamines and improving the and treating the secondary causes. Secondary causes of eosinophilia can still coexist in those patients. So that is a point we need to think of. Even if you have allergic bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, the eosinophilia, if it is high, it is better to treat with the DEC and albendazole because some of them, these may be coexisting. But steroid can be continued indefinitely. But of course, in alternate doses, maintenance doses, never on a daily basis. So when you are using steroid, never continue to use it indefinitely on a daily basis. Always taper it to the smallest dose to control symptoms, and then make it alternate days so that the patient can continue to use it.
Okay, sir. Next question. When suspecting tropical pulmonary eosinophilia, is there any role for serum IgE or filarial antibody titer for confirmation or empirical DEC?
In fact, empirical DEC should be given without any of these. If you want to do some research work, only the IgE and antifilarial antibody should be looked at. Actually, we should suspect, because if you just do microfilaria testing in asymptomatic individuals, some 20% are said to have positive microfilaria in the blood. They're walking around without any symptoms. So if you have tropical pulmonary eosinophilia, you should diagnose it as due to microfilaria. There is no point waiting for investigation reports. If at all, when after treatment, if it recurs only, probably it has a role. Otherwise, for research purposes. For routine diagnosis, both has no role.
Okay, sir. Next question. 33-year male obese with a BMI more than 35, mild to moderate eosinophilia, treated with DEC for 3 weeks. Atopic tendency present, has been having hypertension for the past 3 years. How to proceed?
It is a hypertensive with a persistent eosinophilia.
Yes.
Atopic tendency.
Yes, sir.
So there is a possibility of that patient needs some individualized evaluation. You may have to think of a allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis. Look for its evidence. For example, if you find SGOT-PT elevation with SGOT more than SGPT with alkaline phosphatase, that could suggest a granulomatous hepatitis 2. If there is anything to suggest a granuloma anywhere or a pulmonary infiltrate, that qualifies to make it an allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis. Otherwise, it may be just tropical pulmonary eosinophilia and hypertension because the person is obese. Obese person with hypertension is the usual usual idiopathic hypertension type. So that needs to be controlled separately. But if you think that hypertension and eosinophilia are related, you need to think of a tropical allergic conjunctivitis and granulomatosis. There you need to look for evidence of vasculitis as well as granuloma. Or autoimmune markers may be looked for. That needs individualization. Just that history alone cannot tell what all need to be done.
Okay, sir. Next question. Coronary occlusion and eosinophilia, is there a relationship?
Definitely, vasculitis can occur at any area. If you have eosinophilia, you can get myocardial infarction, you can get endocarditis, you can get vasculitis, you can get stroke, you can get peripheral vascular occlusion, because eosinophilic granules are toxic to the endothelium and endocardium. So you can get even coronary occlusion. Always coronary occlusion is multifactorial. In any patient with coronary occlusion, even if the typical so-called coronary artery disease have multiple factors like hyperhomocystinemia, antiphospholipid antibody sometimes, and if there is eosinophilia, there may be a contribution of eosinophils. There may be an autoimmune type of vasculitis, anything. So always coronary artery disease is not a single etiological factor.
Okay, sir. One more question. It's a personal question. Sir, I was taking antihistamine for more than 1 year for generalized pruritus. Eosinophils 8%. No other findings on routine investigation. I hadn't taken DEC. Once I had orchitis. Please advise how to proceed.
orchitis indicates probably that there is a filarial etiology. So it is better to get DEC and probably steroid during that period of DEC administration. Then you need to individualize. Always look for multiple causes for eosinophilia. Otherwise, I cannot comment on that. Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
So no further questions in chat box.
Okay. So can we wind up now?
Yes, sir, we can wind up.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Dr. Nishat, Senior Resident in the Department of Family Medicine, for delivering vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. Thank you, sir, for a very informative talk on eosinophilia. It was indeed a very wonderful session. The participants, on behalf of the Department of Family Medicine, I thank all the participants here and all the ones who had made the discussion very lively by asking questions. And once again, I thank all, expecting your participation in our upcoming sessions also. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.